This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Christi Nogle and Jessica Peter about the upcoming anthology Collage Macabre, an exhibition of art horror. Christi Nogle is an associate editor at Pseudopod and the author of the Bram Stoker-nominated novel Beulah. She lives in Idaho with her partner Jim and their gorgeous dogs. Jessica Peter is a social worker and health researcher with poems and short stories that have appeared in Lamplight Magazine, the No Sleep Podcast, and several anthologies. She lives in Ontario, Canada, with her partner and their 2 black cats. Welcome to the show, Jess and Christi.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Since this is an anthology about different art styles, I'm going to ask you a question about the art of candle making. Chandlery, if you were a candle, what would you smell like? Jess, I'm going to you first.
I'm going to go one of my favorite scents, which is green tea. Like a nice, light, fresh green scent. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, Christi.
I would smell like peppermint because I'm just constantly eating different kinds of peppermint.
Because the peppermint is exuding from your pores, you think a peppermint candle? That's an easy one. I'd probably be coffee or something like that. Tell us a bit about yourself. Did you grow up and stay in the same place, or did you move around a lot?
I moved around a lot when I was a little kid. My parents were always on the run. We lived in southern Illinois and southern Indiana a lot, and we also went through like Florida and Alaska and just different places all the time. But then I've been stuck in Idaho since I was about 10 years old and living different places in Idaho.
I'm from Hamilton, which is a city of about 600,000 people in the southern Ontario, Canada, about an hour from Buffalo. And if you visualize Buffalo, you probably got Hamilton too. It's that like Great Lakesy, kind of gritty, but a great food scene. But I actually was born here, but I have moved away a couple times. I moved away for school, not too far, only about an hour down the road. And I also lived in Ghana for a little while when I was doing my master's, because I was doing an internship there in community development for several months. And I lived in very rural Ghana, in the middle of nowhere kind of thing.
Christi, what got you started with horror? Were you into it? Were you afraid of it when you were young?
I was really into horror from the first time I was exposed to any horror, which I don't know. I guess I saw little glimpses of horror in things that weren't like we read the Bible, and the book of Revelation has a lot of horror. Just the Bible in general has a lot of horror.
That's some OG horror.
Yeah. I remember the first movie I ever saw that was like a ghost movie, I guess, which is called Watcher in the Woods. It's like a Disney movie. I just remember being horrified by that. And it just kind of circled in my mind, it was like an obsessive thought. What if I look in a mirror and I don't see myself?
30 years ago, something happened in these woods. Something happened in this chapel. Something no one will talk about.
It's none of your business.
Something happened to a young girl. And it's happening again.
I couldn't see myself in the mirror.
The Watcher in the Woods, from Walt Disney Productions. It is not a fairy tale.
After seeing that, I read all the horror that I could.
Nice. You got bit by the bug?
Yeah.
How about you, Jess?
I always was into spooky stuff as a kid. I mean, even on Halloween, I always wanted to dress as something scary, and my mom wanted me to dress as a princess, and I would not go that route. But the funny thing is, I had a lot of trouble. I loved horror. I loved cemeteries, and I was terrified of all those things. I couldn't walk in a cemetery. And, I remember reading Bunnicula and its follow-ups, like Howl They In and all of those with the dog and the cat detectives and like very light ghost stories.
The ABC Weekend Special for this week is Bunnicula, the Vampire Rabbit, based on Bunnicula, a book by Deborah and James Howe. Well, what's a Bunnicula? It's a rabbit who's supposed to be a vampire. Is it true? There's one way of finding out.
It took me probably 2 years as a kid to finish one of them because it was so scary for me. So I had this like weird love terror of the horror genre, but it was always part of my part of my childhood and up till now.
Did you develop an accessory phobia about rabbits or celery?
No. Strangely, I didn't have problems with the rabbits, the drained celery and everything. It was just, it's like I associate it with ghosts. Everything was ghosts.
Gotcha.
And even the word mystery would scare me. You know, if you said mystery to me, I would be like, have some trouble sleeping maybe that night.
Wow. Now you intentionally craft horror words. That's amazing. So how did you guys make the leap to creating it yourself?
The very first horror story that I wrote was about 2015, I suppose. I went on a retreat with some friends and they were writing short stories. And I said, I want to write a horror story. I just kind of forced myself to write it. And I guess it probably took me another year or so to feel confident enough to submit it. But that story is called In the Country, and it was my very first horror story.
Nice. Jess?
I've written since I was a kid, too. Although I wouldn't say I wrote horror. I've written things that are always not realistic fiction, but I would say I was writing more things like dark fantasy or dark urban fantasy a lot of the time. Our world, spooky elements, but I wouldn't say I was writing in the horror genre. I've only really started writing in the horror genre in the last 3 years or so. Part of why I made the shift is that I was writing those elements already, and I realized how much the genre had opened up, especially in the last 5-10 years, to seeing all those other pieces as part of the horror genre too. It's not the late 90s and it's mass market Stephen King and Dean Koontz are the only way to define the horror genre. Nothing wrong with mass market Stephen King and Dean Koontz, but it's beyond that. And I saw where I fit in there.
That's a really interesting that you saw yourself in the genre and then you were able to move more comfortably in that direction. So let's get into Collage Macabre. Jess, your story was a study in umber about a bunch of English gentlemen who decide to unwrap a mummy for entertainment. And this was a very real phenomenon and amazing topic for a short story. It's ghoulish, it's historical, it's macabre. I like that you worked in these other nods to like mumia powder and things like that, where there was this mummy craze where people were using mummy pigments for paint. People were using mummy powder for makeup. People were ingesting bits of mummy. Do you remember any of the research you did for that?
So I write mostly historical horror, and I had got that factoid about mummies. It was Egypt mania in Victorian England at the time, and they were just buying up mummies like crazy. Like they went through so many mummies, and they weren't storing them and keeping them in museums. They were unwrapping them and grinding them up and using them for all sorts of things. It is a wild historical thing to think of, like, wait a minute, this isn't just a mummy, it is somebody's dead body. And it's like, everyone was into it. It was very popular. The story even starts with an invitation to a mummy unwrapping party. And I basically snagged the text for that from a real Victorian invitation. It's all very true to life, other than the supernatural elements, which were the included part.
Which haven't been documented, but cannot be disproven.
Exactly. You never know. It might have happened at one of those parties. There's
a long history of corpse medicine in England where they would take parts from convicted criminals and, the hanged men and things like that. So I think there was just something literally in the cultural drinking water about ingesting corpses. And then this craze of Egyptology set off by my great-great-grandfather, Howard Carter, who opened King Tut's tomb. That's a lie. No relation.
Believing it. I was there with you, believing that.
The fact that, these mummies were so well preserved incited some kind of obsession with the Victorians. I think there was a resonance there between empire building, right? The idea that they were somehow linked with this ancient empire, but also the idea of living forever. And if you could just eat a bit of this mummy that had been preserved for 5,000 years, you could take in some of that vigor. So gross and freaky. Yeah, I really liked your story. Christi, can you tell us a bit about your story, Callous?
This story is kind of focused on grief. The main character has lost their mother and is trying to kind of process that. I suppose it's a ghost story. I would say any kind of a story that is focused on the lingering of a loved one is a kind of ghost story. And in this story, I would say the energy of the lost mother is kind of taken over some of the objects in the home, so that you see things like paper sculptures become animate.
In your story, there is this sort of unfulfilled wish from the main character, Natalie's mother, and she wants her daughter to get back to painting. I think I've read in your bio or online somewhere where you studied visual arts, and that's been a goal of yours to get back to it. How much of that informed your story?
I mean, there are ways that you bring in autobiography into a story, and they usually get twisted. For example, my mother always wanted me to get back into writing. I don't think she really cared that I painted, but she always wanted me to go back to writing after I had quit doing it when I was in college. So I don't think anybody but I wants me to go back into painting. Like, I'm the only one who really cares about that.
Mm-hmm. It just occurred to me because I've done some painting and I've held on to all my supplies and I've reorganized them. And I've told myself, okay, I'm going to circle back around to this when I have time. And I really miss it. It is like a form of grief. It's like I can't let go of this feeling. I have a longing for this thing. I miss it, but it is gone from my life. And I guess we're lucky that, in theory, we can get it back, unlike some other things we lose that we can never get back. So in your story, the character starts off painting and then moves into all the other art forms of visual and physical art. Is that representing, the shift from two-dimensional to collage to sculpture, that extruding from a flat plane into 3 dimensions? Was that these issues she's dealing with, these hauntings, coming into reality?
Yeah, I'd say so. So she's starting out with drawings, which are awkward at the beginning, because she hasn't been drawing in a long time. But she starts out with drawings and then works into paintings and then dioramas. And the diorama is a kind of midpoint between a drawing and a sculpture. And then ultimately the story ends with a large sculpture.
Large animate sculpture.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you both were talking about art as grief. So this is it's a funny anthology because it's not like any editor chose the stories. We all just decided to put an art horror story, however we define that, into it. But 2 of the main themes, if you read the whole anthology back to back, one is grief for sure, and one is obsession. So I think that one really lands. It lands in a way that makes sense because artists with the obsession over their art, I mean, it's really relatable as a writer, and, I've been on stage and things like that. That obsession is really relatable. And then the grief of losing the obsession, of losing the art. It's interesting that you both mentioned it as connected to art.
I don't know if it's because I've experienced a bunch of grief recently myself in the last few years, or if it's COVID, and as a culture, we're all grappling with a massive unprocessed grief. But it does seem like the buzzword, for lack of a better term, in horror nowadays is grief. I think the themes of grief are really present in a lot of the indie horror, a lot of the horror movies. I think we're going to see that for a while to come, which is fitting since art and creativity is an expression and is a coping mechanism for that. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about some of the other authors or some of the other stories in the collection? I really liked Ai Zhang's story in the collection, Breathe, Blow, Burn, because it was about blowing sugar sculptures. And I knew such a thing existed, but it never occurred to me to mark that out as an art form and then to bring that into a magic system or sort of magic realism. I thought that was really awesome. There's a story in there called Darned If You Do, Darned If You Don't about crochet, and I thought that was so clever. I really liked the different ways that people played with this concept around artwork.
I love how they're not on the same genre, but there's a lot of weird fiction in here. And there's a lot of, as you were saying, grief and obsession. So they feel really cohesive, even though they weren't put together by an editor. One story that I read during the workshop stage, because we read and edited each other's work as this was being put together, was The Children's Ball by Ryan Marie Ketterer. That one is what I would call weird fiction. And it's such a fabulous story. I also read How to Make It in Hollywood by Rachel Searcy, which is a story that focuses on film, and it is fantastic. Andrew F. Sullivan's Twigs was another one that I workshopped at the beginning stage, and his and T.J. Price's Lat are both, I would say, along with Ryan's, examples of weird fiction, and they're both fantastic. But I don't want to keep mentioning stories because I think they're all fantastic, but maybe Jess has a few more that you'd want to point out.
Just to tease stories for people who are going to pick up the book, I suppose.
There's a few really neat orders. So we get the historicals right in the beginning with The Red Lady by Mob, and then my own Study a Number, and Julie Seven's Lady Widow, which is a take on, what's her name? The one that bathed in blood?
Elizabeth Bathory.
Elizabeth Bathory, thank you. I was losing the name. And then there's another really cool string that starts with Paint It Red by Nina Shepherdson, which is about red paint. And then it moves into Lack by T.J. Price that Christy mentioned, which is about black paint. And then it moves into Chiaro Obscuro by Alex Wolfgang, which is like this breakdown of like reality. And it's this really neat, like, obsession tinged with paint. And then it intensifies in the next story, and then it breaks to shreds in the third one in a row. So the order I've actually found really works, especially, which was really intriguing for me, because we didn't, there was no public call, there was no private call, not really. We just decided to put in what we wanted to. And then our final two are Matthew Mikan's Like the Devil and Timothy Lanza's Take It From the Top. And either one of those, I think, could have ended the anthology really nicely. They're both on stage, and one kind of shuts the door and one opens it. And they really have haunting final images, both of those.
Tell me a little bit more about the Future Dead Collective.
It's a group of friends who write horror and related genres. The people in the book are all friends who had workshopped each other's stories and edited each other's stories. And we also created the cover together. And I'd say we're all good buddies.
What are some of your future projects, Christy?
Well, I have a short story collection of dark science fiction and futuristic fantasy stories coming out from Flame Tree Press in September. It's called Promise. I have stories in the Bitter Apples and Monstrous Futures anthologies coming out soon as well.
Jess, what do you have on the front burner?
So I'm currently querying agents with a historical horror novel set in 1919 about a British female volcanologist exploring strange volcanic activity in far eastern Russia. So that is out with a bunch of agents right now, and I'm hoping to be able to bring it to the world one day. Next up in short fiction, I've got a couple things coming out in June. I've got an erotic folkloric horror coming out in Les Petites Mortes out of Ghost Orchid Press, and it's based on Breton folklore like Brittany and Western France. And I also have a story in Bridget Gates' Crimson Bones anthology, which is Gothic romance.
Wow.
And for that one, I wrote a Rust Belt Gothic in a collapsing steel city, which is close to home, but I set it in the 1980s with a veteran of Vietnam.
All right. Let's get spooky. I heard a conspiracy theory, Christy, that Idaho doesn't exist.
Have you heard of the Greater Idaho thing where they want to annex part of Oregon to Idaho?
No.
So I wonder if it's maybe related to that. A lot of people are excited about taking Eastern Oregon and like just melding it somehow with Idaho.
Okay. As I have read, the idea is that Idaho was put on the map because cartographers needed a barrier to separate Utah from Canada, but you swear that Idaho exists.
I mean, I wouldn't swear to it, you know. It could just be this sort of liminal space. Maybe we've dreamed it.
Okay. A soft confirmation of the Idaho doesn't exist conspiracy. Jess, while you were spending time in Ghana, did you get to witness any West African Halloween-type traditions?
I was there on Halloween. They do not do Halloween in any sense.
Right.
So I lived in a school for women learning a new trade, or I lived at the school because I was also doing career counseling, which was kind of wild because I don't know what the careers are there. Very different space for me to do that. But I was there at Halloween, and every Saturday night there was a talent show kind of thing. People would go up and do drumming or singing or poetry, but it was in Ewe, which is the language of the area I was in. And what I did was I sang the French song C'est l'Halloween, which we would sing growing up in Canada. I had to describe pumpkins. They have pumpkins. They don't have jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah.
I had to describe the whole idea of we cut open this gourd that you also eat here, and we scoop out the flesh and we make a face on it and we put it on our porch. And that was just, everyone was like, that is crazy.
I love the fact that they have pumpkins and no one ever thought to put a face in one.
It was like crazy to them. Why would they take a food and do this thing with it? Put it on their
Seems
porch?
wasteful, I'm sure. Exactly. What's the song that you sang growing up in Canada?
Say Halloween. It's Halloween. I could sing it, but it won't.
So, C'est l'Halloween.
Yeah, that means it's Halloween. It goes, C'est l'Halloween. Hey, c'est l'Halloween. Hey. And then it goes and it lists all the things. Les hibous sont gris. The owls are gray. I don't know what the bats are doing. They're doing something too. All the different Halloween things are described in a long list.
I am now officially obsessed. I will track that song down. I will edit it into the podcast.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Jessica, you'd said that your mom wanted to dress you as a princess. You resisted. I would like you each to tell me your best and worst costumes.
One of my favorite and worst costumes, there's a picture of me and I'm dressed as Dracula, really masculine Dracula too, with the widow's peak painted on and my hair dyed black and slicked back. And I'm in front of a poster of a pumpkin, which I had on the back of my bedroom door.
Nice.
But I was also dressed in a garbage bag.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was back in the day. But it was like, you look at this picture, and other than the widow's peak and, the fake plastic bangs, it really looks like I'm dressed as more like a vampire garbage bag than like a vampire. Can that count as both, like best and worst?
It certainly is sublime. Was the garbage bag a practical consideration to keep rain and snow off, or was it your version of a cape?
I mean, it was both. It was a vampire cape that was also a garbage bag. We were thrifty and crafty, but not necessarily in a way that made costumes look really beautiful. But definitely I look like a vampire of some sort. But I don't know, probably the same. You probably didn't grow up in Idaho, right, Christy? But probably a lot of states are similar. We'd go out with like snowsuits under our costumes. So the garbage bag was definitely, we had snowy Halloween sometimes. Cold, rainy was pretty common. So yeah, garbage bag doubling as a very, very cool cape.
And you could just dump candy down your neck hole and just collect it that way. Christy, what were some of your worst Halloween costumes?
Well, I was gonna mention my best. My best Halloween costume, we did my face up like a tiger, with really detailed face paint. And then I had this beautiful mane, because of course we all had spiral perms back in the 80s. This huge mane that we spray painted gold. And then I had made this custom gold sweatsuit, and it was pretty cool. But my worst was dressing up as Freddy Krueger, because I had the perfect sweater and I had the claw hand and I looked pretty good, but I had this greasy, nasty makeup to look like Freddy Krueger, and it just started sliding down my face. It was so nasty. And it was around like 8th grade or something, and I realized, I was all done up, and I felt like I'd done a pretty good job. I was looking like, oh, all other girls are trying to look cute, aren't they?
Well, you're a real one. I'm glad you were trying to represent the hardcore horror. I remember back then that you had to wrap aluminum foil around some plastic knives and then duct tape them to a glove. And if you could get to like an Oz or a Spencer's or a Party City where they had a Freddy Krueger glove, those first ones where the cheesy plastic knives were like all bent and it was just this crappy glove, that thing was worth its weight in gold. That was like the coolest thing we could imagine. And you had one?
I did. I kept it a long time, and it didn't. I don't think it was as cheap as the one you're explaining. Like, obviously, it wasn't metal; it was plastic, but it was a nicely machined kind of plastic, I guess, or nicely molded.
When did you stop trick-or-treating?
I remember the last year. I was 13 or 14, and we weren't planning to trick or treat. We felt a little too old to do it. But it was a really warm night, and I had like a cape and a mask, and it still wasn't super tall. I am pretty tall. I'm 5'8", so it would be a little obvious that I wasn't a little kid, but I was still a couple inches below that at the time. And I had a friend across the street, and we were like, let's just do it. And I remember it was warm for Halloween, and we just threw on our capes and our masks so they couldn't tell how old we were. And we did it really fast and got our big bag of candy. But it was a good last trick-or-treating. We knew this was pretty much as late as we could go.
It was a crime of opportunity. Like, okay, let's just do it quick. Let's hit them before they realize we're tweens, and let's get out of there. How about you, Christy?
I actually never trick-or-treated until I was maybe 12, because my dad was anti-Halloween because he thought it was evil and demonic. So I went when I was 12 and 13 or something like that. So I went like twice. Isn't that sad?
It is heartbreaking, except for the fact that now there's nothing to stop you from trick-or-treating. If you walk up with a group, they don't know if those kids are yours or not. They might just think you're a cool aunt or, you're somebody's mother, and walk up there and get that candy.
Yeah, no, good idea. I'll do it.
It seems like all of your trick-or-treating experience so far comes down to just 2 outings. So one was Freddy Krueger and the other was a lion, or was that just for school?
The first time I dressed up, I was a witch, and then I got chicken pox that day. And so, of course, I didn't get to go trick-or-treating that time.
Was your dad like, in your face, I told you?
The next time I was the lion, and I did go trick-or-treating, and then I didn't go when I was Freddy Krueger, and then I did go when I was, like I said, like 13. And that time I didn't really have a costume. I just threw on my mom's robe and curlers. So it was pretty sad that time too.
What do you guys do now to keep Halloween alive? Jess, you've got your song, you've got gray owls, you've got bats doing whatever they do.
I'm going to tell a story first, not of this year, but of a few years back. I went the most Halloween-y Halloween I've had. I went to New Orleans, and on October 30th, I went to the Vampire Lestat Ball, and then October 31st, I went to Frenchman Street, which is basically like, it's not an official parade. It's in the French Quarter it's not an official parade, but it is a parade like all night long. And it's some of the best costumes I've ever seen outside like superhero costumes at cons, like really, cosplay people, but like elaborate things. Like some people had basically floats, like they were in like cars full of like dressed as rain showers and squids, and the Vampire Lestat ball was really cool too. Most people were vampires. I wasn't.
You didn't bust out the garbage bag?
No, I was dressed as Baron Semdi, actually.
Ooh, nice.
Which I don't know if I would now still. Cultural appropriation reasons potentially, but I wasn't really thinking of it as like religion. I was thinking of it more as folklore. But it was very cool. Like New Orleans at Halloween. New Orleans at all year is spooky, but at Halloween is amazing.
So can you tell us where we can get our hands on Collage Macabre?
It's a pre-order right now. It comes out April 18th, and there is actually a VIP bundle on sale until April 23rd. Saturday, April 22nd, we're doing a live event. Links will be coming out soon. It'll be free online. Come on out. There'll be contests and prizes and things like that. But until it comes out April 18th, you can pre-order on Amazon. We also have a website. It is collagemacabre.com with a where to buy link.
Fantastic. I will share those links far and wide. Christi, where can people find out more of your work?
ChristiNogle.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Christi Nogle as well. I wanted to say that event's going to be really fun because we'll have people doing art live at the event and people reading. And then I heard also that we might have some like masks or something of that nature.
Oh, I'm in. Jessica, where can our listeners find more from you?
My website is jessicapeter.net. You can see all my publications and such and upcoming things there. You can also see me on Twitter. My username's jessicapeter1.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on the show and introducing us to Collage Macabre. I had a great time reading it, and I can't wait to share the pre-order link so people can get their hands on it.
Great, thank you.
Bye, guys. Subscribe and follow the show. Links are in the show notes. You can find Ryan at 20th Century RG with the number 20 on YouTube. And you can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.
Les sorcières sonnent le soir, les fantômes aussi. Le ciel est tout noir, les nuages sont gris. Est-ce que tu as peur des méchants esprits? Oh, monsieur, oui, 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 oui. C'est Halloween, c'est Halloween, c'est Halloween. C'est l'Halloween. Pendant l'Halloween, tu peux être ce que tu veux. Un tigre féroce ou un serpent bleu. Et